This program is presented by AARP. Get voting information you can trust at aarp.org/nyvotes. The battle to control Congress could be decided in the Empire State.
I'm working really hard to flip the House through New York.
But aside from multiple key House races, all New Yorkers who vote must choose who to send to the Senate.
We need to hold our elected officials accountable.
Incumbent Democrat Kirsten Gillibrand is eyeing a third full term in D.C.
Nothing ever gets done in Washington unless regular people stand up and demand it.
But Republican challenger Mike Sapraicone aims to become the state's first GOP senator since the 90s.
It's my time. I think the time is right. We feel it in the air.
Tonight, hear from both candidates, their positions on the issues that impact you the most.
We want better jobs. We want a stronger economy. We want a better education system. We want health care for everyone.
Immigration is a federal issue. Poverty, cost of living is a federal issue. Crime is a federal issue.
From your local election headquarters, this is New York Votes, Race for U.S. Senate.
Good evening and welcome to this special political program, New York Votes, Race for U.S. Senate. I'm Dan Manarino, host of Picks on Politics at PIX 11 News in New York City. This special being seen in every corner of the Empire State on all New York TV stations owned by Nexstar Media as the candidates vying for U.S. Senate speak to all voters. Tonight, you will hear directly from Democratic incumbent Kirsten Gillibrand and Republican challenger Mike Sapraicone. Only one of them can be a senator in D.C. representing New York when the 119th Congress is sworn in on January 6th of 2025. Senator Gillibrand seeking her third full term in the Senate. So as an upstate House member in 2009, she was appointed by then Governor David Paterson to replace Hillary Clinton after Clinton became Secretary of State. Looking to unseat her is Mike Sapraicone, a political newcomer who runs a private security firm that employs more than 600 current and retired law enforcement officers. Sapraicone was a New York City police officer for 20 years before retiring as a detective in 2000. And take a look at this. A brand new PIX 11 The Hill Emerson College poll finds Gillibrand with a substantial lead over Sapraicone, 50 to 33% among likely New York voters. But in the next 34 days, Mike Sapraicone will try and close that gap as he aims to pull off a stunning political upset. So Sapraicone, raised in Richmond Hill, Queens, went on to become a police officer in New York City. He began as a transit officer, retired as a detective, then founded Squad Security, a now global security firm. But up until now, his highest elected office was president of a school board on Long Island. So I sat down with Mr. Sapraicone to find out why he wants this job representing all New Yorkers in D.C. And Mr. Sapraicone is joining me now, so great to have you here.
Well, thanks, Dan. Great to be here.
I want to begin with what we're seeing play out in real time, the big news that's happening out of New York City, and that is surrounding Mayor Eric Adams. First time in history that a mayor of New York City is indicted on federal charges. From your perspective and how you view things, should he resign as mayor of New York City?
Well, I think we have to sit back and see what happens. If it's not a distraction, and as soon as it becomes a distraction, then he has to do something. As long as he can control what's going on with his team and with what he needs to do in the city, that's his priority, to take care of the city, not Eric Adams. Priority is New York City.
Should the governor remove him?
I don't think the governor will remove him. She hasn't removed the district attorney for the things that have happened here in Manhattan. I don't think we'll see her remove Eric Adams.
Okay. If the mayor does not resign, and this continues to play out as expected with the trial, the mayor has seemingly blamed the federal government for targeting him for speaking out about the migrant crisis. And former President Donald Trump is agreeing with much of what Mayor Adams is saying. So do you believe the mayor's claims and the former president's claims, that Donald Trump's, that the mayor is being targeted by the federal government?
I don't necessarily agree with that. I think the mayor has a history over the course of many years of doing different things, and I think he needs to be accountable for that. If he can explain that and show that there is a reason that the federal government is doing this to him, then that's all well and good. But I don't see that as the situation right now.
Okay. I want to talk about your race and three big issues right now that we polled New Yorkers on. And one of them, of course, is the economy. That is the top issue in our PIX 11 Emerson College The Hill poll. So take a look right here at some of these numbers right on the screen. The Dow Jones is up 12%. Inflation has reached a 3-year low. And the Fed just announced this half percentage point rate cut, right? So when you look at all of that, it would seem like there is, Mr. Sapraicone, a very strong economy. Yet in our poll, 45% of New Yorkers say they feel as if they are worse off today than they were a year ago. Why do you think that is? And what would you do to change it as a senator?
Well, I think as soon as you go to the grocery store and you start to talk to people, and you look at what it costs to go to the store. I paid $6.29 for a half a gallon of milk the other day. I can't imagine that that's okay. I can't imagine that people who are struggling, working 2 and 3 jobs just to feed their family, that it's okay. It may look in the polls that this isn't a big deal, that inflation is going down, economics are back on a peak, but we're nowhere where we were 3 or 4 years ago. When people sit down at that Thanksgiving table and find out it cost them $200 more this Thanksgiving than last Thanksgiving, and maybe $250 more next year if we stay at the same place we are. People are feeling the economy. This is something that's affecting everybody. And I think once I'm a United States Senator, what we need to do is manage things better. We need to do more about inflation. We need to do more about bringing jobs here to the economy. We need to get people back on the right track, and we need to do that with common sense, Dan. And we're not doing that now.
That's rather broad, right, to tackle inflation. So what is one specific item to tackle inflation?
Well, I think we have to make sure that everybody that our jobs are paying the right amount, that people are working hard and getting the right pay for what they do. And I'm not saying we should inflate the minimum wage to a crazy percentage, because that only hurts our businesses. We need to make our businesses stronger. And when our businesses are stronger and we bring more business to this state, there's more opportunity for the employees to get better jobs.
Former President Trump has consistently said that he is the right candidate on the economy. Now, a big issue in New York that I'm sure you're very well aware of is the SALT deductions that were taken away under Mr. Trump. He has now vowed to bring those back. But let me ask you first and foremost, in your view, was it a mistake to take them away in the first place?
I think it was. I think it's something that's important, especially to Long Island where I live now, but throughout the whole state. I think it's important that President Trump is saying he'll bring it back and change that. I think that's a big deal, and I think that helps us in this state very much.
So he has also come out in favor of not taxing tips and Social Security benefits. So do you support some of those initiatives that he is now putting forth? Would you support them as a senator?
I do. I think the non-tip thing is terrific. I think that's important. I think that generates more revenue to us. It generates better jobs for people. It gives people an incentive to want to do that type of work, that service.
I want to move on to a topic right now that is very big here in New York City. You are well aware of it in Long Island, and that is the topic of immigration. In fact, one poll showed that nearly 50% of New Yorkers would describe the number of migrants seeking the sanctuary here in New York as a crisis. So do you see it as a crisis, and what do you believe is a solution?
So I certainly see it as a crisis. And I was just down at the southern border in Yuma, Arizona a few weeks ago. And people are saying, well, this is a humanitarianism thing. This is a security issue. The people, the illegal immigrants coming to this border are causing a major security issue in this country and in this state. And we need to look at that. I think if you look at what the stats were just the other day, there's over 15,000 convicted felons, murderers, that have gone into this country in the last several years, and over 13,000, I believe, rapists. Somewhere near 600,000 criminals are now in this country that were either vetted and pushed through or not vetted at all. And that's not just a humanitarian issue. We want immigration here. We're all immigrants at some point. My grandparents came here from Italy. But what's important is that we control the borders so that we all have an opportunity to live in a safe location.
So former President Trump has promised to oversee, quote, this is his words, the largest deportation in the history of this country, end quote. Do you agree with that tactic, first off?
I think where we should start with deportation is getting the criminals out. That's where we should start. We're never going to be able to deport everybody who's come in, the over 2 million people in the last 4 years. But we should look at the criminal element, and we should work with ICE and strengthen ICE in order to do that.
So for the remainder of those folks who aren't criminals, what do you see as a path to citizenship for them? Should they be allowed a path to citizenship since they are here?
Well, I think we have a lot of people here now. I think we need to shut down the border to move forward. There is no plan B because we have no plan A. So I think we need to shut the border down. I think we need to evaluate everybody who's come into this country. And, you know, we deal with asylum seekers, and that's just become a catch-all. Everybody says, I'm an asylum seeker. There's rules and laws in place. We need to enforce those. We need to decide. We can't just let everybody come into the country for no reason. We need to put more judges on instead of people waiting 5 to 7 years and just wandering this country without us being able to even know where they are. That needs to change.
So you said you were down at the border, right? And Vice President Harris was there as well. And some of what you're talking about right now with the more judges are exactly what Vice President Harris is talking about as well. Installing new detection machines at ports of entry, crafting tighter asylum rules, hiring more border agents. Do you support those 3 things that are on the screen right behind me?
Well, what my concern is, Vice President Harris has been in office 3.5 years. Why has she decided now to look at some of the things that President Trump is saying, that I'm saying, and decide these are things we're going to start doing? Why hasn't she done them? Why isn't she doing them right now? Why is she talking about the future will be this? She's had an opportunity here to do this in the past 3.5 years and has failed to do that.
And Democrats say that this was not voted on in terms of the border bill because Republicans wanted to run on a problem rather than a solution. So can you see why they would think that?
Well, so I spoke to many of the sheriffs down when I was in Arizona, and only 2 sheriffs in the entire border were in favor of this bill. Mm-hmm. This bill didn't do anything. It didn't help. It was still going to bring in 5,000 people a day, and everything else was tied into this bill. As we'll see in many bills, Israel funding was tied into it. Ukraine funding was tied into it. China stuff was tied into it. It wasn't just about the border, and it wasn't stopping the flow into the border. It was still allowing up to 5,000 people a day, which is not acceptable.
So you would have been a no vote if you were a senator at the
I would
time.
have been a no vote, yes.
According to New York Times, 210,000 migrants, I want to zero in on New York, have come to New York via New York City between the spring of 2022 and this past August. Now, Mayor Adams has been talking about how there should have been more federal aid. Do you think if you were a U.S. senator, you would have sent more aid from the federal government to New York to deal with the crisis?
Well, I think the aid is an after effect. I think we shouldn't have let the crisis happen in the first place. I think it's a cause and effect. The federal government caused the problem. The sanctuary cities is another whole issue. We've become a sanctuary city and a sanctuary state so that people are coming here, and now we're looking for federal aid. I think the federal government should have stepped in the very beginning. There should have been a plan, and we should have decided how we're going to fund. We didn't decide how to fund the problem. Now we have a problem, and now we're going to try to work on it. And that's not the way to run a government. The way to run a government is say, listen, this is what we're going to do. What's our plan, and how do we go forward? And we lack that, and that's part of the common sense problem we have here in this state and this country.
So just to be very clear, before I move on to the next topic, one of your goals would be to shut the border down entirely just until you can get a handle on the folks who are here.
Certainly.
Okay. I want to move on to this other big issue in our poll, and that is the topic of abortion. And I want to play a clip from you speaking about abortion on a radio program earlier this year. Take a listen.
Anybody in this state can perform an abortion. It doesn't have to be a doctor. And that you can go right to term and have it. That's murder.
So is any abortion, Mr. Sapraicone, past 24 weeks, is that murder, even to save the life of the mother?
Well, I'm not going to say that to save the life of the mother would be murder. Listen, I'm pro-life, okay? I would never vote for an abortion ban in this country. But I think to save the life of a mother is very important. That's that person's individual decision, and they should be able to make that decision. And, you know, here in New York State, and we don't talk about this, 50 years ago, we made abortion legal in the state under a Republican governor and under a Republican-controlled legislature. So I think it's important to realize that it should be a state issue, and that's the way I look at it.
In our poll, we did ask voters what view of abortion was closest to theirs, okay? So 7 in 10 voters said Roe v. Wade should be codified and codified at a federal level. Do you believe that Roe v. Wade should be codified when New Yorkers are saying, 7 out of 10 of them are saying it should?
I don't. I think it should be a state issue, and that's where it should stay.
In that clip of the radio show, you did mention late-term abortions and being murder. What evidence do you have that there are late-term abortions happening in New York?
Well, I don't have evidence that there has been any, but we have a law that says you can get an abortion up to the end of the term.
But you don't have any evidence that there actually is that happening?
I don't have a name to mention.
A national ban on abortion, it is not happening, but it's not the you say a national ban on abortion is not happening, but it's not the same thing as saying you'd be a no vote on it. If it came to a vote and you were a senator and it came to the table of a national abortion ban, how do you vote?
I'd vote no.
You'd vote no. In terms of the topic of IVF, this has really come into the forefront in the last couple of months. Do you believe in a right to IVF?
I do.
Would you vote to protect IVF rights if that came to a vote?
Yes, I would.
And so you'd separate the two from abortion and IVF, right? So, Senate Republicans are the reason, though, that a bill protecting IVF recently didn't pass. So do you disagree with some of your Republican colleagues, then, who are saying that it shouldn't be?
Well, I think it should be. I agree that it should be. We should have IVF, and I think we should pay for it through Medicare. The personal insurance should be able to pay for that also.
Okay, I want to talk about filibuster and the Supreme Court here. Now, it's a little inside baseball for some voters, right? But it is an issue that matters here. So how far would you be willing to go? And are actually you in favor of getting rid of the filibuster rules?
You know, to be fair with you, I haven't really thought about the filibuster. You have to realize, too, I'm just an average citizen.
Yeah.
So I'm probably not aware of every single rule there is, and as I learn them. But I'm a regular guy worried about my everyday economy, about my crime in my city. I'm not familiar with the filibuster rule, and I'm just being honest with you.
I appreciate that, because filibuster can be complicated, especially to the everyday voter. But let me talk about term limits. That's something I'm sure you're well aware of for federal employees, including the Supreme Court. So do you, Mr. Sapraicone, support any term limits for members of the House, for the members of the Senate, or for the Supreme Court?
I do. I think 2 terms for a senator, 12 years would be fine. I think 3 terms for a congressman, 6 years would also be fine. Supreme Court, I don't think it's the purpose of the Supreme Court when our founding fathers created our system. They shouldn't be part of that system where they're vying to be elected again and another term. They're there for a life term, and I think that's important.
If you were a senator, would you bring the term limit bill? Right now there is one between Senator Cruz, Senator Gillibrand, your opponent. Would you join that?
I would.
And
not for the Supreme Court.
Right,
but
for House and Senate.
Right.
When it comes to the Supreme Court being expanded, that has been a big topic of conversation. Are you in favor or not in favor of expanding the Supreme Court?
I think it's fine the way it is.
So just keep the exact number of justices.
The way it is.
All right. Some topic that you are very well aware of and in the know about is crime. And 45% of New Yorkers that we polled say they feel like more crime is happening now compared to 1 year ago. And another 40% say they feel as if it's about the same. So Mr. Trump on the campaign trail just recently suggested this, quote, 1 rough hour of policing that would put an end to rampant crime. I'm not sure if you heard him say that.
I did not.
So he said 1 rough hour of rounding some folks up. I'm curious to know what you think of what 1 rough hour looks like.
Well, I'll tell you, the perception of crime is terrible in this city. So when I was in the police department as a detective back in the 90s, we were able to work on quality of life crime and bring the crime down in the subway system and in the city. I think we need to go back to quality of life crime. I think enforcement. I think we need to go back and enforce the smaller things, because the smaller things bring to the bigger things. And we talk about recidivists. A certain percentage of our crimes in this city, in this state, are all committed by the same amount of people. So I think that's important. That kind of leads into bail reform. So what I would be looking to do is enforce crimes that we need to enforce. I would be looking to enforce basic crimes, jumping the turnstile, okay, drinking on the corner, open containers, the basic things we went to change the crime in this city. I think that's important. I think alone, and you had Chief Shell on a few days ago or something, and he talked about 44 guns recovered in the subway system. 44 guns recovered because of basic police work, of enforcing basic crimes. I think that's important.
You're mentioning bail reform. I'm just zeroing in because that's a state issue.
Well, it's a state issue, but you know, it affects everybody. I mean, I think my opponent called for federal bail reform, which is absurd. It's not common sense. And I think there was at some point where saying that people are in jail just because they can't, the people are being put in jail because they can't pay for bail. Well, they're being put in jail because they committed a crime. And now they have the opportunity to get bail. Listen, police, and I talk as a cop for a moment, police are certainly in favor of bail reform. We don't want to see millions of people in jail that don't deserve to be there. But we need to put more judges in, have judges have more discretion, and to look at the crimes and the individual situations. Look at the poor police officers who were beat up in Times Square. Those illegal immigrants were put in jail for a few hours and released and fled New York City.
Okay, so on the federal level of things, would you want to take a look at the issue of bail reform?
I think certainly we should take a look at it, and we should take a look what the states are doing as far as bail reform. There needs to be some order and some common sense use in what we do with bail reform. Here in New York State, we didn't speak with the district attorneys, we didn't speak with the police commissioners, we didn't speak with the sheriffs. The state legislature and the governor decided what bail reform should be, and that's when they acted. And that's wrong.
I just want to go back to that 1 rough hour quote from the former president. It sounds like you disagree on that as a former cop on what exactly that would look like. Do you disagree with that statement?
Well, I'm not sure I understand what 1 hour would mean. What can we do in 1 hour? I think we need to look at law enforcement overall. We need to enforce the laws that are there, and we need to still use our discretion. But we need to start at the bottom. We need to start with quality of life, and that will lead up to stopping major crimes.
So you referenced those guns that were found, those 44 guns that Chief Shell mentioned the other day. So you know very well the dangers that guns pose. In 2022, following the Top Supermarket massacre in Buffalo, there was the school shooting in Uvalde. Congress passed the bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which notably expanded background checks, right? So what, if anything more, would you be willing to do when it comes to gun reform?
I think background checks are completely important. They have to have background checks. I think the red laws, I mean, there's some things that have to be looked at there, but I think the basic foundation of the red laws, red flag laws, are very good. I think we need to examine who has weapons and who should not have weapons. I think Chief Shell also mentioned over 1,500 knives recovered, and we don't look at knives as just as much a deadly weapon as guns. They are.
Right.
So I think that's important. We need to build off of that foundation. We need to build off background checks. But I certainly think we should not be taking the Second Amendment away from our people. We have the right to bear and carry arms. I think that's important. We need to support
assault-style
that.
weapons.
Yes.
Are you in favor of
Say
a
it
ban?
again, I'm sorry.
Assault-style weapons that we've seen used in some of these shootings. Are you in favor of a ban?
I think there's different. We live in a different situation. There's different ways that people look at their weapons. Down in New York City, everybody I pretty much see with a weapon, other than a police officer, is probably carrying that illegally, right? It's a different culture as we travel the state and see people who protect their farms, who don't have a 3 or 4 minute response time from police, sometimes have a 40-minute response time between sheriffs and between troopers. Guns aren't the things that kill. People kill, not guns. I think it's important to realize that people should have the right to bear arms. Automatic weapons were thrown out years and years ago. Semi-automatics, there's different reasons for having them, and I understand that. I'm certainly...
So assault weapon ban you're not in favor of?
I'm not.
Okay. And I want to move on right now to kind of the presidential candidates, because there's going to be a top-down ballot this year. So you've been endorsed by former President Donald Trump. You have endorsed him, right? Former president, as you know, is a convicted felon. You have frankly made a career of arresting bad guys. You've referenced a number of times during this interview that you were a former police officer. So what is your take as a former member of the law enforcement on the former president being a convicted felon?
Well, I'm sure that will go to an appeals court, and I'm sure that will be overturned. I think it's kind of interesting to see him being convicted on 34 counts of felony counts. This is kind of, if he wasn't who he is, I mean, at that trial, the insurance companies came up, the banks came up, and they said nothing was done. There was no charges. This is something that's being brought upon him because he's running for the presidency again, and because people are not happy in the other party with what his thoughts are. Yeah, he is a convicted felon right now. I think that will be overturned, and he will not be a convicted felon.
When it comes to the election security, and if Vice President Harris were to win the election and you were to win as Senate, would you vote to certify the election?
Yes.
You don't believe, even if the former president, who has already said that there could be election fraud, you would certify the election and not believe that there was election fraud? This is
America. We live in a democracy. I would certify it.
Okay. Your opponent in this race is a 3+ term incumbent who's raised $14 million this cycle. You only prior elected office as a local school board. And you have not raised $1 million this cycle. So with such a stark contrast, I guess, and considering that New Yorkers haven't elected a Republican for senator in more than 30 years, how do you plan to win over some of those voters since we haven't seen it go red for quite some time?
Dan, you know what it is to be a school board president? You know how tough that is, okay? So that alone has given me a great opportunity here. And listen, I do this because, first of all, I think common sense needs to come back. I care about my 5 grandchildren and my 5 children doing better than I have done. And because I care. I care about this state and this country. And I think, listen, the polls the other day, your poll came out and it wasn't really favorable for me, okay? But I think I'm in a better position than I ever could be. The polls are just a snapshot. I think it's important to work hard and travel the state, and I've been all over this state for
Here's
the
the thing. Let me just go to that poll for a
Sure.
second. It was 50% for Kirsten Gillibrand, 33% for you, but there was 15% undecided. And the reason I'm asking this question is because how do you pull those undecideds to your corner?
Because you talk to them. You meet with them. You go see them. This is something my opponent hasn't done in this state. In 15 years, and you poll at 50%, she should be polling at 70%, okay? No one has seen her. She's been nowhere. As a detective, if you put her in a lineup, you can't pick her out anywhere. And that's what people are telling me as I travel the state. It's important that you go out and talk to the constituents, to listen to what they... Now, I can talk. I like to talk to them. We could talk for 3 hours here. But it's important that we listen to the people that elect us, and we hold our elected officials accountable for what they haven't done, as well as for what they have done, to make sure that's correct. And that's how you get that 15%. And maybe that's how we get 5 or so percent from her also, because we want to listen to the people, we want to meet the people, we want to talk to the people, and I want to be the senator for every person in this state.
I've heard you often refer to Ms. Gillibrand as missing in action.
Yes.
She has not missed many votes on the floor. When you say missing in action, what does that mean?
the state. I'm saying that as I travel the state, most people don't know who she is. They're asking me, who am I running against? What's his or her name? And no one has seen her.
Okay. I want to ask you about a big issue right now, and this is more of a state issue, but you are from Long Island, so I wanted to get your take on congestion repricing and whether or not it should or shouldn't happen. And the reason I ask this, too, is because some of the money comes from the federal government when it comes to the MTA. So what are your thoughts on congestion pricing? I
think it's terrible that we're going to charge $15 a day to our teachers, our firemen, our cops. People who live in the 5 boroughs alone, just to go into Manhattan, would have to pay $15. People from Long Island, people from Rockland and Westchester who come here and make a living here, we're going to charge them $15. I think it's terrible that we put up all the material to check as you come in, and now we're not using that at all. We're losing over $600,000 a day, and I go back to paying your fare on the subway. We're losing that money just for not paying your fare on the subway. We're losing, somebody said, $700,000 a day for not paying your bus fare. Why aren't we doing better and managing our money better?
Would you kill it at the federal level?
Would I kill it? Yes, I would certainly kill it at the federal. I think it's wrong. I think it's 100% wrong.
Okay. Are you ready for rapid fire? We're out of time, so I got to get to rapid fire.
Go
okay.
ahead.
Jets, Giants, or Bills?
I'm Jets.
Jets. Mets or Yankees?
Mets.
Mets are having a moment.
Mets.
Favorite food, upstate and downstate?
Hot dogs.
Hot dogs all around. That's
everywhere.
Both zones.
Everywhere.
So this is an interesting question. It always gets an interesting answer. Where do you draw the line between upstate and downstate?
Well, I thought it was right outside the Bronx, but it's somewhere around Albany. Okay. I learned quickly that I always thought north of the Bronx was upstate. I learned quickly south of Albany is downstate.
Right. Westchester is not
I'm just going to go back to your football question quick, too. Listen. The Buffalo Bills are the only New York State team. I will certainly be up there after the election to watch that Kansas City game.
Okay, favorite season in New York?
Oh, I like summer.
Okay, and mountains, lakes, beaches, and oceans. You get it all, so which one?
I like beaches.
There you go. Mr. Sapraicone, I appreciate your time.
Oh, Dan, thank you so much.
All right. That's okay.
Appreciate it.
All right, when we come back, I sit down with Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. Her pitch to represent you for a third full term in Washington when New York votes race for U.S. Senate returns in just 90 seconds.
You're watching New York Votes Race for U.S. Senate.
And welcome back to New York Votes Race for U.S. Senate. Before the break, we introduced you to Republican Mike Sapraicone, and now it is time to hear from the incumbent, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. Here's the backstory. She was born and raised in the Albany area, graduated from Dartmouth College before getting a degree from the UCLA School of Law. From 2007 until 2009, she represented New York's 20th congressional district, including Albany, Saratoga, Schenectady, and parts of Rensselaer County. But since the start of 2009, she's been serving in the U.S. Senate. And after being appointed and winning 3 elections, she is hoping New York voters send her back to D.C. again. Here's my conversation with Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. And Senator Gillibrand joining me now. So great to have you here, part of this forum.
Thank you.
Senator, I want to begin with the news of the week that's really been dominating the headlines, right? And that's the news of what's playing out in New York City with Eric Adams, right? Being the first mayor in New York City history to be indicted. So the question is really point blank. Do you think at this point in time, seeing the indictment, that he should resign?
So I do a lot of national security work in the U.S. Senate. I sit on both the Armed Services Committee and the National Intelligence Committee. And the part of the indictment that gave me the deepest concern is just that this is a foreign government trying to influence our government. I don't think Turkey is considered an ally in all contexts. Sometimes they have been helpful, sometimes they have been unhelpful. And so that's the biggest concern, because for New York electeds to be targets of these foreign countries undermines our own national security. So I have deep concerns about the nature of the indictment and the allegations. I also have concern about, can the mayor continue to govern given that so many of his top-level personnel have left? So that's my biggest concern, that what I will need to see from the mayor over time is, can he continue to govern? Because that's what we do. We put the people of New York first.
So not calling for a resignation yet?
At this point, no, because these are criminal allegations, so he really is entitled to due process. But my concern is there. Showing that he can govern is going to be very important.
So if he does not resign, Senator, the mayor has seemingly blamed the federal government for going after him, saying he was targeted because he was outspoken about the migrant crisis, not getting the funding from the federal government. Do you believe that to be true? And do you believe that if he does not resign, it could potentially hurt top down on the ballot come November?
So I don't think he's being targeted because of the immigration crisis around the country. Based on the allegations that I've read, it seems this goes back many, many years before he was mayor. So no, I don't have that worry. No, I don't think it's going to affect other races because I've been very focused not only in asking voters to support me for my reelection to continue to be senator, but also I've been trying to help the House candidates, the House seats that we lost last cycle. And those are located in Syracuse and the Hudson Valley and Long Island. And most voters in those areas really focus on their own community, their own kitchen table, the challenges they have for their families. So I think they will choose their candidate based on what they stand for, what they hope to do when they get to office. And those House races are about the balance of power in Washington and which party is going to put families first in terms of health care and education and jobs.
So let me talk about your race and the economy, which is the top issue when we did our poll here, right? So take a look right here, some of these numbers from the PIX-11 Hill Emerson College poll. So far this year, as you know, Dow Jones is up 12%. Inflation has reached a 3-year low. The Fed's just announced this half percentage rate cut, which was higher than what they expected, right? So it would indicate, when you look at all those things, that it's actually a strong economy. And yet in our poll, as you see, 45% of New Yorkers say they feel as though they are worse off than they were just a year ago. So why is that? And what can you do as a senator to convince them otherwise?
Well, I'm not going to be convincing them otherwise. When I travel around the state, people still have enormous anxiety. They have a lot of financial insecurity that was largely caused by COVID. I don't think we've really recovered from the COVID pandemic. If you talk to parents, their kids are still, a little bit shaky. I had high schoolers at the time and a middle schooler at the time. And as a parent, I've been watching, make sure the mental health of my children and their friends are strong, being able to really listen to how they're doing and how they're navigating. For Henry, his new high school, for Theo, his new college. Those are really issues that families are really trying to balance, making sure they can still get good health care. There's not a great deal of mental health services nationwide, and so one of the things I've worked on is surging mental health for violence disruption across the country, and we've gotten about $100 million into New York to directly address that. But for a lot of people, they lost their job, or they decided, I don't want to do that anymore. I mean, part of COVID was existential crises for a lot of families, and they just made life decisions like, I don't want to live in that city anymore. I don't want to be standing on my feet all day. I don't want to be a first responder or in a critical care area because the stresses were so high. And so we've not fully recovered. And so people feel that anxiety, even though the price of gas has come down. When I was in Albany, my mother knows a place where she can get it under $3.
Okay.
Costco. So she will stand in that line to get it for like $2.79 or something. And so the gas prices have come down. We've done a lot in government to try to address other costs like healthcare costs. For our seniors, we've seen drug companies continue to spike prices of many drugs that have been on generics for a long time, like insulin. So we capped insulin at $35 a month. We've capped all of the 10 major drugs by negotiating in bulk and making sure seniors don't pay more than $2,000 a year. So those are helpful. But still, people are anxious. And as you said, the interest rates are coming down, but mortgage rates are still much higher than they were, 5 years ago. So people loved free money. People loved money that had no interest or very low interest. And so having to pay interest is still a challenge for small businesses and families who want to get a mortgage. And,
and with all of that in play, right, the vice president on her campaign trail has proposed 3 big things that people are listening to: down payment support for first-time home buyers, this expanded child tax credit, and then this additional tax relief if you're opening a small business, right? But if you don't fall into one of those 3 categories, people have real issues about some of the things you just mentioned. Yes, while gas prices are coming down, they are still having issues being able to go to the grocery store and spend a certain amount of money for a family of 4. So how do you address that?
So food costs is an issue. The supply chain was deeply affected by COVID. Truckers didn't want to be truckers anymore. We have our supply chains that come through the Middle East constantly getting attacked in the Red Sea by the Houthis, like just ridiculous things like that that affect global supply chain. And I think farmers have had a tough time getting all the workers they need because we need immigration reform, we need more ag visas. So there's a lot of challenges with food prices. And those are things that we want to work on. But one of the things I want to work on for New York is I want our SALT deductions back. And that really hurt middle-class families because we were being doubly taxed. If you've already paid your state and local taxes, why do you have to pay those taxes again? It's absurd. And that was one of the worst things that President Trump did to New York. He denied us the SALT deduction over the last 5 years. It was very bad for people.
So he says he wants to bring it back now.
No, you know what? He needs to do nothing because that SALT change is gonna expire next year in 2025. So I would respectfully ask former President Trump to stop trying to fix things that you are the one who broke, because he broke it and he ruined it for all the New Yorkers who needed those deductions.
But a New Yorker, by the way, Senator, not to interrupt you, has said that they don't know where the vice president stands on the issue of SALT. Have you spoken to her about this and said we want this back?
I will speak to her about it, and I wouldn't be surprised if she supports us. It hurt her state too. It hurt California, it hurt New Jersey. It was a tax on blue states. It was a tax on big states. It was a tax on states where local governments do a lot of social services and help people. It was mean-spirited and it was harmful. So we want to make sure that the deductions are restored. That'll help people too. So there's a bunch of things that we can work on that are much more broad-based to help lots of people do lots of things. And the child tax credit that the vice president is talking about, it's very helpful for all families. I don't know that all families know that they got it, but it brings families and children out of poverty. It cut the child poverty rate in half. So it's meaningful. And we want to double it, so we want to get it to $6,000 a year. And for any family in New York who has kids, $6,000 a year goes a very long way.
Right.
That certainly is going to pay for the new sneakers your kids need. It's going to pay for maybe some after schooling. It might even pay for a summer camp. Like, there's lots of things you can make an investment with that money that help your family and your children.
Okay, I want to move on right now to the other big topic in our poll, and that is immigration. It is one of the top 3 issues when you speak to a New Yorker, right? Whether or not they are in New York City or not. So the Biden administration, as you know, enacted this executive order putting the daily limit on the number of crossings into the U.S., which is something that many had called for months. And after that order, the number of crossings actually dropped to a historic 3-year low. So do you think, when you look at the totality of all of it, that it should have happened sooner?
So President Biden tried to do a couple of things that I thought were very meaningful right out of the gate, but he got sued and he lost in court. So the one thing I really liked is our challenge in New York is most of the people coming here are here legally because they have claimed asylum. And we give rights to someone who's claiming asylum to get an adjudication. That's why the bipartisan bill that we had negotiated in the Senate was so important, and I wish we could have voted on in the House as well, but President Trump said, don't vote on it. I want to make it a campaign issue, which is cynical and terrible. But that would have surged resources, surged judges and lawyers. So instead of adjudicating these claims in 2 to 3 years, we could have adjudicated them in 2 to 3 months. And the estimation I received was that about 2/3 of the asylum seekers in New York, the 2/3 of the 150,000 people, would not qualify and they'd be sent home. So that would have made a difference, just fix the law. But the thing he wanted to do was related. He said you have to apply from your country of origin or your first safe country. You can't show up at the border and say asylum. That would have made the system so much more effective because we wouldn't have this massive backlog. Because when you have a backlog on asylum, people can't work. They have to wait, tick the time from the day they applied for 6 months. And what really frustrated New Yorkers that I heard was people standing on street corners, you know, young kids creating a lot of problems and doing mischief and criminal activity. People were very anxious about people who weren't working, who weren't, you know, part of society. And that was really a flaw in our laws.
Well, a real issue for a New Yorker as well was that, according to the mayor, and when you talk to a regular New Yorker, is that they did not get the federal aid needed. Should New York, because they were really dealing with the brunt of the crisis, have received more federal aid?
Absolutely. We sent billions of dollars, but the cost was much higher than that. So what the governor and what the mayor and what I and others have been wanting is we want these emergency work visas because we have 200,000 open jobs in New York State right now. As I mentioned, our ag workers suffering. We don't have enough ag workers. If you talk to any restaurant or hotel, most places in the state, especially upstate, they don't have enough workers. They can't even they can't even rent out as many rooms as they have because they don't have enough people to clean the rooms. Restaurants, they have to have less shifts, less items on their menu. You talk to our hospitals. Every hospital in New York State is desperate for healthcare workers. So the other thing we should be doing that takes legislation is we need more legal visas. So there's actually a legal process. I don't want people showing up at the border. I just introduced some bipartisan, bicameral legislation to do more on the northern border because families are being trafficked across the northern border by criminals and dying. They had a family two families with children and grandparents. They took a boat in the middle of winter across the Canadian border and died. That's an outrage from a humanitarian perspective, but also from immigration reform perspective. So I have legislation to surge resources, make sure we have more Border Patrol agents, but also to have different rules and to engage Canada on what they're doing to stop the stem the flow and stop the crossings that are ending in people dying.
I want to move on right now to the third big issue for a New Yorker in our poll, and that is the topic of abortion. So in our poll, we asked voters what view of abortion was closest to theirs. 7 in 10 voters said Roe v. Wade should be codified, and codified at the federal level, Senator. So if that were to come to a vote again, would you be a yes vote to codify? And do you see a future where that is a reality again?
Absolutely. So there's two ways to get the there's two ways to codify Roe. One is the Equal Rights Amendment, and it is ready to be signed and published by the archivist today. Today. We've already passed it in the House and Senate. That was in the 70s. We've already had the 3/4 of states ratify. The last one to do it was 2020. And because Trump was president, he denied the signing and publish of it based on really very poor legal arguments that aren't actually operative or valid. And so the archivist has the authority today to sign and publish. If she did, equal rights amendments have been used in states across the country to guarantee women reproductive rights and reproductive health care. Because if all male reproductive care is covered but not all female reproductive care, it's fundamentally unequal. So one way to codify Roe, to just guarantee reproductive rights, is to have the ERA signed and published. I'm sure lawsuits will fly. It'll go up to the Supreme Court eventually. They'll decide one way or the other.
Why hasn't it happened? If the archivist can do it today, why not?
Because Trump denied it. Trump's Office of Legal Counsel denied it. So we are asking this new archivist to do it because it's her job to just sign and publish. And so I've made the arguments to her. I'm hopeful that she reviews this and signs and publishes it.
Before the election?
Before or after. Any day. It is all the work has been done that Article 5 requires. And so we've had 3/4 of the states ratify this. It would guarantee equality, which is much bigger than just access to one medical service. Like it's about everything. It's about if you are treated differently based on your gender, it needs equality. We're going to have a ballot initiative on an equal rights amendment in New York this year as well. So that's Prop 1. Everyone, you want to vote for the equal rights amendment, you have to turn over the ballot. Prop 1, vote yes. It's really important that New York shows our leadership on this too. So that's way one. Way two is you would bring up the resolution saying it's time for the archivist to sign and publish, to just say those words, both House and Senate. That could put that back in play.
And you think both the House and Senate would pass
The House has already passed it twice when we had the majority.
Yeah.
The Senate, we have 51 votes right now that would vote for that, I think. Certainly all the Democrats would vote for it. I think Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski might vote for it as well, so it would be bipartisan. But you would need a 51 vote threshold to do that.
I want to talk about the filibuster, which is a little inside baseball, but to some New Yorkers it's important. And in 2017, you opposed changing filibuster rules, but have since come in favor of changing them, right? So can you explain the reversal for the everyday New Yorker and how far you'd be willing to go to get rid of the filibuster altogether?
So things have changed over the last 10 years or whenever I thought the filibuster was working. The filibuster requires to get onto a vote, to vote on it, you need 60 votes. That's what it requires. And what it means technically is to stop debate on something and vote. And I thought, that's okay. We can have the requirement of 60 votes. It'll make sure everything's bipartisan. It'll make sure that we have lots of advocacy to bring that consensus. But what happened since then is Mitch McConnell took away the filibuster for Supreme Court justices. So to have a threshold of 51 votes for someone who's going to have a lifetime appointment, who has the power of the Supreme Court to take away the requirement of real bipartisanship negotiation that a filibuster usually offers, really has changed the whole climate and the whole rules of the Senate. So I think under that change, I think now we should be able to do, you could maybe limit it to issues of civil rights or issues of social justice. But I think it needs to happen. The truth is, though, when you do have a 51 vote threshold, it does degrade the chamber on a certain level. There's less bipartisanship typically. And so it's a shame that they did it for the Supreme Court. But given that, I would now support it.
Yeah, you brought up term limits, right? So I want to talk about term limits for senators first,
Yeah.
right? Because this summer you were here on PIX on Politics and you had this to say about them. I want you to take a listen.
I also believe in term limits for judges, for Senate, for House. Ideally, I'd like a 20-year term limit on everybody. And so that would be my hope. So you've been in office now for more than 15 years, right, Senator? If reelected, you'd surpass the 20 years in office that you're actually talking about there. So what does that mean for you and your political future after this election?
So I would love to have term limits. And the reason why I like the idea of it is because it keeps our governing bodies fresh. People are constantly coming in with their ideas, with their vision. It just makes it a more dynamic organization. And I am working actually with Ted Cruz on this legislation, so very bipartisan. And I'm trying to get him to include the Supreme Court justices. I think if you want to depoliticize the Supreme Court, one of the best ways to do it is just say you only get 20 years. You don't get your whole life. We used to think if you got your whole life, you wouldn't be political, but I think this court has become extremely political. So for me, then I'd be done if I had, if we had this as a law.
And if it's not a law, would it be your last term?
Oh, I'm not going to decide that today because it's not the law. But I think it would be great. I like the way the city council is. Like, I think it's exciting to have new people running all the time and to have fresh ideas and vision. The opposite side of this argument is that some people reach their best years when they hit 20, and some people are so good at what they do. Why would you want to deprive the country of their service when they're really excellent? And that is a legitimate argument.
For the Supreme Court, would it apply to a sitting member or to anybody new? With the people who are sitting?
I would do it retroactive. I would just say this is it because we need to fix something because it's not working. The other thing we need to do for the Supreme Court is they need ethics rules. It's absurd that Clarence Thomas is wined and dined by people who actually have legislation or advocacy in front of his court. It is an outrage that they pay for his vacations. It looks like that these justices are bought and paid for by people who have business before the court. It's disgraceful. And the fact that Chief Judge Justice Roberts cannot get a mandatory ethics requirement in front of that court is a disgrace. Congress should write the laws, they should get a vote on the laws, and they need to impose it. And they're wrong when they say Congress doesn't have that job. It is our job. We have oversight and accountability, responsibility about both branches of government, executive branch and judiciary.
Should it be expanded, the Supreme Court, to include more justices?
I don't think it's, no. It could be, but it's not going to be done well or fairly because you're going to try to do it all by one party, and then the next party is going to add 3 more. Like, I just don't think it's going to be done well.
I want to talk about the top of the ticket right now and what that means for you as you're campaigning as well. Vice President Harris has been very clear on messaging, and not been very clear on messaging, flip-flopping on some issues, right? She was once in favor of fracking. She was once...
I just want to go back to your question. It's not that I'm against adding members to the court. I would just have to be shown how they could do it well. So I'm not necessarily against it. I want to be clear on that because I have read some thoughtful analysis about that. Certainly the number isn't required in the Constitution, and then there was some argument that it would be appropriate to have 12 justices instead of 9 because I think there's 12. No, it's not that there's 12 circuits. I'm not sure.
So you're open to the idea of expanding
I'd want to have a thoughtful, scholar on constitutional law give me the analysis about why it's better to have 3 more, but I'd also need to see how would you implement that so it's not just a big power grab at one point in time.
Understood, Senator. I want to talk about Vice President Harris.
Sorry, I just wanted to give a more thoughtful
I appreciate
answer on
that. Yes, I want to talk about the flip-flop of Vice President Harris and what that means for you as you're on the campaign trail and answer some questions. She was once in favor of a ban on fracking. She was once a fan of Medicare for all, and she was once in favor of shifting resources from police. Has said that she has kind of changed her position since then. Has she compromised too much and gone too far to the middle on these issues?
I don't think so. I think that for certainly the world changes, circumstances change, and I imagine that her view of what's most important in terms of governing also changes. I think that when you aspire to bring the country back together again, I think you have to listen to voices all across the country about what's important to them. And I think that's probably why has a broader view on some issues that she might have had a more narrow view on in the past. I think it's important for leaders to be able to change their opinions. And I think it's part of the negativity of the press to create gotcha media. I think you want people who can show judgment and show reasoning about why they might actually have presented new information and say, I think in the moment in time we're in, I think it is better that if we go this direction as opposed to that direction.
Yeah.
I just think that the world changes and you have very different perspectives on what needs to happen to make the country stronger or better given those circumstances.
First off, let me say I appreciate you being here at this very moment before I ask this next question, because when I take a look at your website, for example, your website does not feature an issues section for a voter who may be trying to familiarize themselves with you versus your opponent right now. You just launched your first campaign ad. Many would say that you're out there campaigning for House seats and Vice President Harris, more so than yourself. So do you...
That's not true. I have 3 campaign ads on television that are very good.
Yes.
Have you seen one yet?
I've seen one.
Yeah, which one did you see?
Well, let me ask you this question first and foremost. Are you taking this race seriously? And on that issues point, is that important to put on your website for a new voter who may be looking at you?
Are you talking about my political website or my Senate website?
Your campaign website for this race.
Oh, interesting. I'll take a look at that.
Okay.
I wasn't aware one way or the other.
Yeah.
But my Senate website has a lot of issues.
Yeah.
It has all the issues, and we're very focused on our website about constituent services. So if you're a constituent who needs help, you can fill out a form. You can always email us casework@gillibrand.senate.gov. So I'm sure most of the real work is in the Senate website, because that's where we do all the constituent services work.
Senator, I appreciate that. We're out of time, but I want to get to some rapid fire questions. You
Okay,
ready?
rapid fire.
Okay, I think I know the answer to this, but Jets, Giants, or Bills?
Oh, I'm sorry, but Bills.
I figured that.
It's okay.
Mets or Yankees? The Mets are having a moment right now.
Oh, you know what? I don't have a team. Both teams.
Where do you draw the line between upstate and downstate?
Oh, yes, so much further up than most people.
It's not Westchester.
So New York City folks will say upstate starts at Westchester.
Right.
I would start at Mid-Hudson Valley. I would look at a place maybe I'd start at Poughkeepsie.
Poughkeepsie.
Really up there. I don't know, maybe a little further south, I guess. But I grew up in upstate, so I imagine upstate is Albany, is Lake George, Lake Placid, up.
Yeah.
So I really see upstate as Albany up, and I see everything below as the Hudson Valley.
Okay.
But I recognize that's not how most people see the world. I always look at the Hudson Valley as distinct from upstate, but a lot of New Yorkers think Hudson Valley and upstate and the North Country are all upstate, which is fair. It's fair.
We're going to leave it there.
It's fair.
Senator Gillibrand, appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And there you have it. Let's get some analysis of this race right now, joined by PIX-11 political reporter Henry Rossoff and political analyst J.C. Polanco. So great to have both of you here.
Thank you.
Just heard both sides. Let's begin, Henry, first with you and your thoughts overall.
Well, I think both in style and substance, very different candidates we have here. I mean, you have Senator Gillibrand, well-versed on the issue. She's been in the Senate quite a long time, gave really long-winded answers, wanted to go into a lot of detail. And then you had Mr. Sapraicone kind of, projecting, I think, a genuine sort of regular guy vibe, giving kind of short-to-the-point answers. I noticed you got through a lot more questions with him. He gave shorter 1-2 word answers at times. So you have very different personality sort of candidates. The striking moments for me, I think Senator Gillibrand got most passionate when she was talking about SALT and told President Trump just leave it alone. And then the striking moment with Mr. Sapraicone for me was when he really didn't seem to have an understanding. He was genuine, but he didn't seem to have an understanding of the filibuster, which is sort of a key function of the Senate.
Yeah, you need to understand the logistics and the inner workings of government if you want to be part of government, JC. So when you look at it in totality, right, on the issues, to Henry's point, a lot of detail when it came to Gillibrand. And Mr. Sapraicone was light on detail and specifics. What do you make of that?
Well, you know, being light on the specifics has taken folks that I know all the way up to the White House. And I think, and we're looking at a Republican Senate candidate who, quite frankly, is, if you take a look at his website, he's mimicking Donald Trump up and down. I mean, he is the Donald Trump voter here in New York. He represents that very well. Light on the issues and light on specifics, but very strong on his position on immigration, very strong on his position on abortion, and very strong on his position on crime, being a former detective. So he has a base of support across this country. We're seeing it in the polls, and I believe very strongly that he represents the voice of a lot of people, especially out in the rural areas and in Long Island, throughout New York. Remember, guys, New York really is like 4 states, and he's appealing to about 3 out of the 4 of them very well.
Right, but when you look at the poll, 33%.
Because New York City is where it's at, and he's not going to do well in New York City. Look, there was a time when you had Republican presidents, you had a Republican state senate, you had a Republican mayor of New York City. Here in Manhattan, you had a Republican state senator in Roy Goodman, and you had a Republican assembly member in John Ravitz. Those days are over. There was a time when Republicans said, well, believe it or not, you used to have a Republican in City Hall, and Mayor Giuliani and Bloomberg. So it was there was a different time in the Republican Party where you even had a Republican governor. Those days are over. The Republican Party has moved far to the right. You can't be this, you know, you can't appeal to Democrats, and I don't think that the Republican Senate candidate that we just saw is
those politicians you just ticked through, and still to this day, because I would say Mr. Sapraicone's trying to fit this mold, are trying to come across as problem solvers, common sense. He used the term common sense, I think, 2 or 3 times. You know, broke with his party on several key issues, including red flag laws and expanded background checks, but not an assault weapons ban, just to give an example. But on jobs and economy, and you pressed him well on this, Dan. I mean, he said, well, how do you get a handle on inflation? Well, bring jobs. How do you bring jobs? Well, you got to support businesses. How do you support businesses? Right. Well, there was no specifics there.
And also to your point on breaking from the party a bit, abortion was a topic where he was very specific on being letting it be handled by the states, but was in favor of IVF.
Right. Well, that's the cool thing to be right now. To show that you're not a monster, you got to say things like, listen, I leave it up to the states and I support IVF. Then if you push him a little more, you'll hear from, like you just heard, that he supports the federal government funding IVF. I don't know where, you know, it's like the presidential candidate at the top, Donald Trump, says, you know, I think that we should socialize IVF. And everybody goes, yes, I think we should socialize IVF. It's the most obscene non-Republican answer I've ever heard of someone taking a position that the federal government should fully fund a medical procedure. I mean, but this is where we are. We're light on specifics. If you were to ask him, how would you pay for it then if the federal government? I wonder what he would say. I mean, it would be like you're speaking to someone out of DSA or the Democratic Socialists of America when it comes to funding a medical procedure.
We have to leave it there. JC and Henry, great to have you here for part of this evening show. And early voting, don't forget, everybody, begins Saturday the 26th, ends on November 3rd. That is just before Election Day on November 5th. All-important day of November 5th. We're here for you every step of the way until Election night. For now, I'm Dan Manarino. Have a great night.